I'm back with Rory Kennedy, who has two amazing feature documentaries out this year. The new one is called Freefall, and we're going to get there. But I have to reintroduce Rory for those who missed our talk on Queen of Chess, which you should also see. Rory is an Academy Award nominated, Primetime Emmy winning documentary filmmaker whose more than 40 films have made urgent, deeply reported work about power, war, democracy, leadership, and the human cost of institutional failure. Her films include Last Days in Vietnam, Ethel, Ghosts of Abu Ghraib, and the 2022 Netflix documentary Downfall, The Case Against Boeing. Her new film, Freefall, A Reckoning for Boeing, returns to that story through the people inside the company, especially whistleblowers confronting a corporate culture in which safety, truth-telling, and accountability can carry an unbearable price. Rory, thank you so much for being here.
Great to be with you again, Vanessa.
And I know you're on the road with the film right now, so we're going to keep this focused and because we could talk about the subject forever. I woke up thinking about your film this morning and how, honestly, you could title it Freefall, A Reckoning for America. It is such a central story to what is happening in our country, in our world right now. But let's begin where you began, because you had this first film, Downfall, and then there was the Alaska Airlines door plug blowout and John Barnett's death, and you felt compelled to return not just to the story of the Boeing planes, but the culture inside the company. What happened there?
Yeah. Well, first of all, it's great to be back with you. I so enjoyed our conversation a few weeks back on Queen of Chess. So I'm really happy to be talking with you now about Freefall, Reckoning for Boeing. Yeah, I've never made a sequel before, but with Downfall, the film was really focused on the story of the 737 Maxes. These it's a new model of airplane from Boeing, and two airplanes crashed within 5 months of each other, killing 346 people. Initially, Boeing had targeted the pilots, but after investigations and whatnot, it became evident that Boeing had actually withheld evidence from the government and from the FAA and pled guilty to doing that and bore responsibility for the deaths of these 346 people, and was then quite apologetic to the families, to Congress, to the airlines, to the flying public, and said that, we've changed our ways and safety is going to be at the utmost foremost to our new directive. And what I found is that, in fact, they seemed to do that until the MAX got into the air. And then I started seeing both a number of incidents happening, and I'm sure you read these stories of engines lighting on fire mid-flight, landing gear falling off the airplane, smoke filling the cabins of another airplane, and then, of course, the window blowing out of a 737 MAX on Alaska Airlines. So, that was very concerning to me. And then John Barnett, who is a whistleblower who I was friends with during the process of making Downfall, he died while giving a deposition to Boeing. And it was very, questionable circumstances, and the family was very concerned. And then a number of whistleblowers started coming up to me saying, not only have things not gotten better, they've gotten worse inside the plants. And they were all from different plants, but saying the same thing. Downfall was really about this one plane and sort of all the mistakes that Boeing made in creating that one plane. But it became evident that it wasn't just this one plane, that it's much more widespread than that. It's really about the culture of this corporation and what they're prioritizing and what they're not prioritizing. I would say they're prioritizing money and not prioritizing safety. So I felt compelled to go back and tell this story.
It's a powerful investigative documentary, and we don't have enough of those. And the way you manage to put together the full systemic picture of the leadership changes at the top of Boeing, starting with McNerney, who was a GE Jack Welch protege, to Calhoun, whose testimony when Senator Hawley is confronting him is so powerful. You bring the film to such a powerful climax because you've really been showing us this culture of profit over people, of cutting corners, of outsourcing, of deprioritizing expertise. And again, it's our whole country is infused with this corporate culture, and you create the most powerful storytelling in this film. It's not just about Boeing, it's about America and the world. But how did you do it? Because you put the pieces together in this way that build. It's a thriller. You're with the families of the victims, you're with the whistleblowers, and it's profound.
Well, thank you for saying all that. I really appreciate it. It was a complicated story. I would say the thing that motivated me to make this film more than anything was John Barnett's death. I immediately was in touch with his family. I was really crestfallen when he died. Felt like it was a huge loss, and really felt like he had committed his life in the last 7 to 10 years to helping us and the public know what was going on inside of Boeing. And he was doing it at great peril and risk to himself, but because he felt so strongly that they were building airplanes that were not safe. And he really felt like these airplanes are going to fall out of the sky, with our families and our children and our friends and ourselves in the airplanes. And he just felt such a deep sense of responsibility. And so it was really his story, and then all these other whistleblowers, some of whom have never spoken publicly before talking in our film, who are coming forward to me saying, please make this, right? So that was the heart of the reason that I went back into this story. And it was an important, I think, heartbeat to the way that we ended up telling the story, because there are a lot of narratives of the victims' families. There's the story of the CEOs. There's, Boeing's history. There's all of the mishaps that have happened over the last period of time. So is the sound okay?
Yeah, you sound good. Oh, you heard the airplane in my.
Yeah, you heard. So
We live near
the
an
irony. Anyway, so I think that, I just felt that that was kind of the core of the storyline and the heartbeat. And so we kept that as the through line. And then, weaving in these other stories. I mean, I'm not going to lie, it was a very hard film to make in the edit room. And I had a fantastic team. Of course, my husband, Mark Bailey, who was the producer and writer and my partner in all of these films, played a huge role. And then we had, two fantastic editors, Don Klesi and Jesse Oberman, who really helped shape it, and wonderful Kevin McAllister, who also did Last Days in Vietnam with us and a number of other films. So, we had a really great group of people to help figure out this story, and the Netflix executives played a great role too, and were really supportive. So it was definitely a teamwork, but I think we landed on a story that I feel is really timely and important, and I hope is engaging.
It is. Yesterday, Matt Stoller, who writes about corporate culture and monopolies and mergers, was suggesting that David Ellison's idea to move Paramount out of Los Angeles and Hollywood was a parallel to what Boeing did when they moved. But John Barnett's presence in your film has such gravity, and you approach his story with a level of intimacy, but also journalistic care. What do you think happened to John Barnett?
Well, the film really tracks his story in real time in terms of both the aftermath of him dying and doing the investigation as to what happened. And it also because I had interviewed him, I had 6 hours of audio recordings of him, which is also a through line of the film where he really walks through what he witnessed and the concerns he had about Boeing. And he actually kept records, which was unlike many whistleblowers who have to hand over their computers and everything when they're often let go. But he managed to keep those. So we have documentation. And then we were also given exclusive access to his deposition, which is in the film and hasn't been shared or seen before, which is also, I think, very, very powerful. But once we started telling this story, we didn't really know how the investigation was going to unfold. So that happens in real time. And I don't necessarily want to give away what, is revealed over the course of that. But I do think that what his lawyer says at the end of the film, which is something to the effect of Boeing may not have pulled the trigger, but Boeing was responsible for John Barnett's death. And I would leave it to audiences to come to their own conclusion as to what they feel about John and Boeing's role in his very sad demise. But I think whatever your conclusion is, I think it's pretty definitive that Boeing played a very significant role in terms of what happened to him.
Exactly. And it's a huge shift in the corporate culture in the last 20 years that he had experienced the good that was there at Boeing when they cared about safety, that these are life and death issues. Everyone is going to find themselves on a plane at some point or another. And there's nothing more horrifying than thinking you've trusted your life to some company that has decided that you matter less than corporate shareholder profit and CEO pay. And he speaks up about this. And then so many others come forward because of his bravery. And you have the weight, also the moral authority of the grieving families who still don't have justice. How did you go about that storyline?
Well, first of all, thank you for saying all that. And I think you captured kind of the essence of their stories, very, very well. I mean, I think part of it is the humanity, the pure humanity of really not them just telling you what they're going through, both the family victims as well as the whistleblowers, but you experience it. You're on the journey with them and you feel it and you see it. You have eyewitness to what they have to endure. And then you see that in contrast to these Boeing CEOs. So you have these lives that have been destroyed, ostensibly, right? Because people stand up and they're like, you're using parts that have red markers saying scrap parts. These parts don't work. And they're putting them on airplanes that that people are going in, and we there's hundreds of scrap parts that are unaccounted for, and they're finding them on airplanes, and you're seeing that. And then the whistleblowers complain about it, and they're told to shut up. Or they're, the scene in the film where you see the guy hammering with a sledgehammer a bolt to make it fit in to connect the landing gear to the airplane, and the bolt doesn't fit, so he takes a sledgehammer to make it fit. You don't want to be using a sledgehammer to make a bolt fit to make landing gear work, like on an airplane. So you're seeing all of these moments and you're hearing their testimony, and all of these whistleblowers are in plants all over the country on different airplanes, and they're all saying the same thing. And when they voice their concerns, they're told to shut up. They're often demoted, if not fired.
Right.
And their words are flying in the face of Boeing's mission, which is to not slow down production. So when you say something's wrong, slows down production and costs Boeing money. So that's conflict, and they don't want to hear it. And there's these decisions that are made. And so you see those two things in contrast with each other, and just above and beyond that, kind of the lack of humanity. I mean, just that moment in the film where we hear about Boeing's lawyers in the aftermath of the 737 MAX crashes when 346 people died, arguing in court that the people on the plane who were on an airplane that's going up and down that they know is going to crash and they are going to die for 6.5 minutes. And they argue that those people didn't suffer. It's just don't make that argument. Like, just don't do it. The optics are horrible. The lack of humanity. Those lawyers are going through a whole process to making any argument, and it's all been vetted and approved. And you're like, why? Where is your heart?
Yes. Yes. And it's scary that your film shows there is a small, almost moment of reckoning for Boeing where they claim to have changed their corporate culture and made a website where you can file complaints and you can share information about safety concerns, because you're talking to safety managers. These are people who don't want sledgehammers jamming in a bolt for a landing mechanism that's going to fail within years, months. I mean, it's not known how many of these planes out there are still a danger to human life. And so this change in corporate culture seems just like a veneer, because the same punishing response keeps happening. So is there going to be a real reckoning for Boeing?
Well, I mean, just to that point, it's interesting in the deposition, John died 2 years ago. So this isn't that long ago, right? Where after they've said they're changed everything. And you hear the lawyers pushing back when he's talking about the oxygen masks not working on the airplanes. And then she's like, well, you didn't really do a full study to prove that those oxygen masks didn't work. 15% of them didn't work. And he said, well, in that instance, we didn't, but because of that instance, then we did. And we did a much wider study, and we found out that actually 25% of the oxygen masks don't work. And then you cut to later in the film, you're inside the Alaska airplane when the door blows out. Like, we have the footage from people's iPhones, which is so powerful in my mind.
So powerful.
Of being with them on that airplane and hearing their perspective and them talking to their kids. And then there's this huge noise, a blowout, and they look to the left and it's just open sky, and then the oxygen masks come down and they don't work.
They don't work.
A huge number of them. And people are like grabbing their oxygen masks and then they can't breathe.
Right. They're texting their family. They love them. And I'm sorry, I have to say goodbye. And they know that there can be brain damage. There can be ear and nose bleeding from the lack of oxygen and the fast depressurization and drop. I mean, it's horrifying.
Yeah, but that's not a story that's 20 years ago. This is all in real time. I mean, I would challenge Boeing to, we should do like that scene from Aaron Brockovich, which is, okay, why don't all you executives go up on a random airplane, Boeing airplane at 30,000 feet, and let's turn off the oxygen and have those masks come down. And you guys all have to wear the masks. Let's do that. See how many of them say yes to that.
Good idea. That's a really good idea. I mean, otherwise they're not really feeling the consequences. The climax of your film is very powerful. The Holly grilling of Calhoun, who is one of the more recent, the second to last CEO, right? That was powerful and sums it all up. And again, that idea that the CEOs are stripping Boeing for parts and making profit for themselves, it feels so much like what's happening in our government too, in our country.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting, that notion of kind of strip mining companies. And if you look at sort of the history of most of the CEOs in the last many decades came out of GE, and GE has that history. Again, one of the great American companies that really focused on profit at the expense of everything else, and as a result diminished. And I think that's part of the story of Boeing, is knowing that it had such an amazing history and really strived and achieved excellence. And there was that saying that people across the world knew, which is, if it ain't Boeing, I ain't going. And now people are like, if it's Boeing, I'm not going, right? So the shift and this idea, which I think is something that we're hearing about the US government and other institutions, which is they're only as good as the people who uphold them. And that we all have to do our job and our effort to hold these folks accountable. Because without that, things fall apart. And the center cannot hold. The film hopefully can contribute in some way, but it only is as contributory as people watching it and then deciding to do something about it. And whether that's, I'm going to really look at how much in this election cycle, at least in this country that's coming up in the fall, what's the position of the people I'm voting for on regulation? Are they going to regulate these companies? Are they going to hold them accountable? Do they have a history of that? I think that's a good question to be asking about the people who you're going to vote for. JetBlue doesn't fly Boeing. They fly Airbus. So you have other options. And the more you say to the airlines, I'm not going to fly you. I'm not going to fly on these Boeing airplanes. So you guys better go to Airbus. Like, that hurts Boeing. And so I do think there's action items people can take to make a difference here.
And you show that, and you give us hope with the end of the film. When Ted and I were watching, I turned to him and said, didn't Trump get rid of the FAA or at least defund it or something? And he said, I think he cut some of their budget.
Well, yes. I mean, that is true. And the Department of Transportation, and the person who's the head of Department of Transportation, is, I think, a reality TV show star. So there's a lot of questionable decisions made regarding this area. So leading up to the 737 MAX crashes, the FAA had made a decision. There's something called an airline worthiness directive. And it basically says that this plane is okay to fly. So that's always been historically the control of the FAA, to decide whether an airplane is airworthy. So they had shifted that control to Boeing before the 737 MAX crashes. That was one of the things that they attributed to the reason that the 737 MAX crashed, that if the FAA was in there and looking at the airplane, they wouldn't have allowed it to go up in the sky. And so they had made that shift. They just shifted it back in July last month to give the power again to Boeing to decide itself whether an airplane is airworthy or not. So it's a little like, as they say, the fox guarding the hen house. So that's unfortunate. And then there was another instance where, with the criminal case against Boeing, which I think would have done wonders if some of those Boeing executives who were responsible for killing 346 people, which is arguably one of the biggest criminal cases, corporate criminal cases in U.S. history, right?
Mm-hmm.
If one of them or many of them ended up going to prison, that would send a message, a very significant message, not just to Boeing, but across corporate America, which is, you got to make decisions that are going to protect people, or you're going to go to prison, just like the rest of us when we kill people, go to prison, right?
Yep.
So Boeing had actually pled guilty under the previous administration to the criminal charges and said they were responsible. And then the new administration came in and said, actually, we don't really need you to say that you're guilty, and we're going to withdraw the case. And the Department of Justice withdrew the case, despite the judge's objections and, of course, the families and many other people. So there are significant shifts that happen depending on who is in control of the government, of the FAA, of these corporations. Really getting the right people in there is important and trickles down pretty quickly.
This film is a film everyone needs to see and understand what's going on and speak up and march and go to Washington. And you showed the Department of Justice many times to remind us that it exists. But as you say, it's about us holding people accountable and responsible for all of our lives and safety when they're in charge of that.
And I would just add, this is, in my opinion, and I think for many, a bipartisan issue. And as you stated, Senator Hawley plays a significant role holding the CEOs of Boeing accountable. But we all fly, all people fly, so we should all be invested in ensuring that these airplanes are safe.
Yes, yes. It's a tour de force. And I'm so grateful that you had a minute to talk about it. And everyone can see it on Netflix starting on the 19th.
Would love for folks to check it out.
It's in theaters right now. If you're in New York City, you are so lucky. You could see it at the Paris and you could see it at the IFC Center.
Yes. I don't know that it's still at the Paris. It was there last week, but it's definitely at IFC.
So New Yorkers, go see it.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Rory. Thank you. This was really great.
And Vanessa, I have one more feature coming out imminently,
What?
so you're going to have to have me back on for a third time.
Love it. This year? You have a third out this year?
The Trial of Alec Baldwin.
Yes, I was thinking about that one. I know you've been working on it.
Yeah.
Great. Okay. I look forward to seeing you again.
Okay.
Thank you, Rory.
All right. Take care.
You too.